I call the meeting of the Silver Falls School District Board to order. It appears we have a quorum, so we'll move to the agenda review. Nobody's talked to me about changing anything on the agenda, so would a member make a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion? All right, go ahead, Debbie, and call for us.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Jonathan?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Lori?
Yes.
Owen?
Yes.
All in favor?
All right, so just under discussion items, the first item, 3A, is included on the agenda because Pradham seeks to add kindergarten to their list of grades offered. So they're moving from a 1st through 8th grade school to K through 8th grade. And we have to formally approve that. Do we need a presentation on that? No? Okay, it's pretty straightforward. So when we get to the action items, somebody can make a motion that we're approving the grade change. Any discussion? All right, this is not a surprise. Okay, 3B is the decorum agreement, and that was adopted by the board in 2020, and it's on the agenda today so that we can either reaffirm the agreement as is or consider changes. So I hope everybody had a chance to at least look it over. Maybe we could start with anybody who either thinks it looks good or has changes to offer.
I noticed Lori has her hand up. I'm not sure.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Lori.
Hello. I am just trying to figure out how to lower the hand, and I have. So thank you.
All right. All right, so I have some. If nobody else wants to say anything, I just wanted to mention one statement that I really, really like, and so I think we should keep it. In the first paragraph, it talks about proper decorum of a meeting results when each individual is personally engaged in monitoring their cooperation with previously agreed to group guidelines. And I just think that's fantastic, and I wanted to just call that out. The one question that I just want to make sure there's clarity around is number 5, the second bullet. It talks about all board members and committee members shall further agree to, and then it says address comments or disagreements to the board chair and not to another board member. I'm assuming that that's during the meeting, not like an outside of the meeting, one-on-one. Hey, can we
Yes.
talk about this? Does everybody agree with that? That this is like during the meeting, let's not get into
Yes.
a tit for tat back and forth?
That's how I read it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay. That's the only thing that I had that I thought, I hoped we could clarify verbally.
I think one of the things that, after I reread it today, that I thought stood out, because I don't know that we really always did it, and I certainly didn't enforce it as chair, is that all requests to comment or to be recognized have to go through the chair. I'm a big fan of open dialogue, so I certainly never enforced that, and I don't think we all adhered to it, which I was okay with. I don't know if we want to strike it or leave it, but I thought I'd call that out.
I think that, yeah, I don't, when I went to the, I'm breaking my own rule. Would anybody else like to speak before I speak again?
Well, I would say that it definitely feels quite formal. Obviously, the purpose of that in sort of procedural environments is to maintain that, the decorum and just the coordination so that the chair doesn't lose control of the meeting, so that you're checking in. And I think if, it's up to us, really, it's up to the chair how strictly he or she wants to enforce that. And so I think having it there as this will be our practice, but if I think you sort of run a meeting where you feel comfortable and everyone's behaving themselves and there's no reason to come down hard unless you have to, and then you have this to here to fall back on.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've done a good job as a board, at least over the last year. It's not been an issue. I don't think that's why you had to enforce it, Jonathan, as board chair, because there was mutual respect for every board member, and we had good dialogue. But I like your idea, Jana. Just it's there if we need it as a point of order. But I think our best practice has been carried out, and good dialogue has happened. So.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, anybody else want to say anything?
I-
Oh, go ahead, Lori.
Oh, excuse me, little delayed on this end. Yeah, I think it's a good standard to have there quietly, and I agree. I think it's just helpful to always have that as sort of the quiet reminder. So I think it's a good statement, and I would agree with Aaron that this last year has been very good. We've had some very good conversations. So, and I think the tempo and the professionalism has been there as well.
Yeah, I think
That's
that
all.
when Jonathan was chair, I remember like raising my hand a little more when there was lots of discussion in order to get in the queue, kind of. The training that I went to a couple weeks ago said, use Robert's rules, but only if you really need to. Like if you don't have a need, you don't have
Let's
to
have a
be
conversation.
strict about it. So that's kind of, I would like it that we all take a turn before somebody else chimes in, but sometimes that doesn't happen because there's like a quick question back and forth, and generally we've handled that really well. But yeah, okay, so what I'm hearing here is everybody's good with the decorum statement. Agreement. Decorum, it says statement on the title, but I think agreement's probably a good word for it. So 3C is public comment statement, and the policy was attached to kind of just show why the public comment statement says what it does. Does anybody want to start the discussion out on whether we, just keep it as is or make changes as needed?
I think it's a really good statement. My only concern is I feel like it's a bit wordy. And maybe that's just because of how my brain works. I'm a bullet points kind of guy. I'd like a simple statement almost like, hey, we're welcome. Here are some ground rules. Boom, 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 boom. Run down bullet points. Take what we have here, these 3 paragraphs, condense them down to a few bullet points, and kind of be done with it. Because I think folks will understand if we can do that. I would just like to see it condensed.
I certainly would agree. It felt reading it like it was really long somehow. So I certainly would be in favor of seeing it a little tighter. I don't want to necessarily wordsmith it here, but there's things that are really important. I do really like the idea of calling out things like, the board's role is usually to listen and rarely will we reply. I think those are important things. I don't necessarily want to lose everything out of here. We could clean up the part where, you can either raise your hand if you're in person or if you're remote. I just assume do away with emailing Debbie, because it just seems almost archaic on Zoom, right? So, if you're on Zoom, use the raise your hand feature and be done with it. I think we could clean that part up maybe.
Do we need to read it every time before? Maybe that's the problem, because I maybe Owen can remember and Aaron, but there was some times when people would really try to wiggle through and just continually. There's a reason all this explanation is there.
Right.
It's an explainer why we do that. It's maybe we just don't need to read it every time. Can we just use it as a guidelines and then pull it out every now and then if our meetings start to get out of hand, or if we see a room full of people with lots of testimony, or do we have to do it every time? I don't know.
I sort of would like to see it consistently read, at least in the beginning of the meetings, for the purpose of consistency, and also just to have the ground rules out there. because it does offer roadmaps for the public. Certainly if they have something to consider instead of feeling like the board is the one and only source in which they can share something. So I understand the wordiness. I'm all for good editing, which is something, a skill God didn't give me. So I can understand that, but I do think it offers a lot of good information as well. And we should read it, I think, in each meeting, just for the sake of consistency and to have it presented. Like to hear from the others.
Yeah, I'll just say when we rewrote it last year, it was really hard to know what to leave out because, you know, obviously the part about your time limit's important. To your point, Jonathan, the part about we're not going to answer your question necessarily, so don't get frustrated. The part about you can't sit up here and trash your kid's third grade teacher, that's not going to be permitted. Like those are all really important things for people to understand, especially people who come to provide public comment who have not done it before or don't understand. I agree that reading it feels like, I mean, are people even listening? Are they tuning out? Is there a way to capture it in a way that's more helpful? I mean, I don't know if we have a poster, you know, that says, there are the rules, read them. Yeah, it's hard to know how to condense it without losing some things that are pretty vital.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Janet, to your point about a poster, I feel like I've been at council meetings or public meetings like this where they might have a poster, but I was thinking back to, I think a long time ago now, where we would always have printed agendas, and on the back of the agenda or a second page, there would be guidelines for public participation. People have a fair amount of time usually before we get to that. They can easily read that. That might be a good way. Wouldn't help our online people.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If we were going to entertain removing some things, I would focus on the things that haven't been a problem and leave in the things that were. For example, the entire last paragraph, as important as it is, we really haven't had people come up and trash their third grade teachers. So maybe we leave that to the chair to intervene
If it
starts happening, as opposed to read those 2 or 3 sentences at the end, right? You could, go through and, like I said, you could clean up a couple of other sentences here and there. You could leave out the part about groups. We rarely have groups for 5 minutes, but if they are a group, they can look up the rules on their own. We can just say that's a 3-minute limit, and if they request to speak on behalf of a group, then they can do that ahead of time or something. So that I think we could go through and sort of, what are the things that were really important? Well, the 3 minutes. Not everybody. Often we run into the 3-minute. I think we should say that every time. I think we should also say every time that rarely will you receive an immediate response. Those, I think, are the 2 biggest things where people seem to get frustrated. And I think a lot of the rest we could probably just leave in policy and have the chair take care of it if it becomes an issue. My 2 cents.
I mean, I think
Could we,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Lauren. Oh, I should.
oh, I'm once again delayed. Yes. If there's some way we can have at least a line that says refer to policy such and such regarding this issue, I'm a little hesitant to edit too much because sometimes when people don't see it, then they think it's okay to proceed. And I know that we can say, please don't do that. This is not the right avenue. But that's my only concern about that. Having it in writing and having it clear, I think is helpful for the public. Even though it happens maybe once in a blue moon, it's still nice to have it in place. That's just my thoughts. Thank you.
All right, well, I wanted to go ahead and follow up on something Owen said. We could have a handout and people can read it, and I think that is a promising idea. He said it didn't help people on Zoom, but everybody who connects via Zoom connects via board book, right? And this statement is attached to the board book agenda, so they could at least see it. But the problem that I see is that, I think it's a great statement. Actually, I went through it yesterday, and I couldn't find a lot to cut out. And I was the one who was like thinking we need to cut some things out. So I don't know about that, but people don't seem to know that there's a 3-minute limit, and then it gets awkward. But I have thought about this a bit, and I thought I can say, can you state your name and relationship to the district? Are you going to speak for yourself or a group? And then if they say themselves, then just I can confirm 3 minutes. And then I can ask what topic they're addressing. I don't know if that's necessary because we haven't been sticking to the rule, you know, like at the end of the second public comment is supposed to be on action items. No, never followed that rule since I've been.
Well, it's action or discussion.
More discussion.
Okay.
And usually they do generally have something to do with discussion items.
So anyway, I could ask the topic, and then, yeah. I having more of an interactive seems like it might get the message through a little bit better, because it is awkward when people don't realize that there's a 3-minute
Right.
timer, and then it's like you feel bad cutting them off,
Right.
and, you know, but we want to try to stay consistent, so, I don't know, I hadn't thought about not reading it. That was,
Well,
it was one thing that, because I don't think the message is getting through when we read it, because it's just a lot of,
Well, I think I mean, I tossed that out just
Right.
to see how it sounded and how it moved, but I mean, I've actually just listening, I think you read it.
okay.
And the reason is, you know, we're sitting here saying we really haven't had any problems.
Well, maybe that's
That's
why.
because we're reading it. That's why. I would say that's why. And, you know, even though, you know, there's been roomfuls of people here, and they're not testifying, but they're being educated, and they get why that happens. And so I would say that the reason we don't, the time and energy it takes to read it every time is this much, but it's saving us grief.
Yeah, and we don't see that.
Right, because we're doing the so I would keep you might take a few sentences out here and there, and I could look at it that way, but I would say it's doing more harm than good. I'd say keep it in there.
You mean more good than harm?
More good than harm. There you go. Thank you.
I don't mind taking a stab at trying to help wordsmith some of it, just to bullet point it. You know, like I said, if we could just make it boop, 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 and even if we took it from 2 minutes to 1:15,
Oh, that'd be great.
that'd be helpful, you know?
How long
Just-
does it take to read?
I really don't know. It just seems like a long.
It does. It does.
And are we
it seems-
reinventing the wheel
It's probably
here?
30 seconds.
Yeah,
It just seems
right.
like a long time.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you know, I generally think that bullets are easier for people to read anyway than paragraph style. I wouldn't mind if you wanted to
don't mind.
do that. But these are the other things that I want to critique here. We need to make sure it says in the raise hand feature instead of the chat feature, because that's conflicting information, right? And then at the bottom, it talks about the decorum policy, but it's not really a policy. It's like an agreement, right? So we need to change that. And then I'm wondering if we need to attach the decorum agreement at the same time, because if this is saying you need to be, you know, in accordance with the board's decorum agreement, well, we should have it available, and I don't even know if that lives anywhere publicly, unless you search for
Yeah,
it.
it could be right there next to this. one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just attach it, yeah.
So those are my 2 cents. How do people feel about Aaron or somebody else or a group of people looking at where we can find efficiencies?
I like
Good?
it too.
Janet?
Yep, all good.
Okay. All right, moving on.
If I could just add one thing to, I would say that the piece about not talking about, you know, staff or teachers or anything like
That's
that is
important.
important to keep in there.
Yes.
I agree.
Because your legal counsel will advise you that at least you've been, you know, if in the event that you tried to, you were both proactive and then responsive in case somebody did something, so.
Yes, and that includes all employees. And I think we refer to the board policy, and that is definitely in board policy, so
Yeah.
Right.
I think that, I agree that that's important. All right, 3D, agenda template review. This was kind of a cool thing. Debbie was just able to take this right off of Board Book because she input the template into Board Book, and then just this came out like as a PDF, right? And so the question is, do we want to just keep it the same, or do we want to make adjustments? And if staff have ideas, We are definitely open to those ideas.
I think it's a solid template. I don't see any holes in it. And I think we've, at least over the last year that I've been on the board, it's served its purpose and hasn't had any issues that I've seen.
Agreed. I know as chair last year, this was really helpful. It just laid it out. We knew kind of what we were aiming for. We knew what to pull out. If nobody had a board report, we just scratched it during the month. I mean, there's just things that were really easy to do. And I can't think off the top of my head of anything that was problematic, honestly.
Timing of when we had kids here presenting. I mean, I think we move things around sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
When people needed to get out earlier than,
Mhm.
we were going to stay. But
Mm-hmm.
overall, I think it looked pretty good to me.
Well, and it's a guideline, not it's not rigid from that perspective. If somebody had a hard deadline or we needed somebody to present who had to be here at a certain time or leave it, yeah, we always dealt with that. Yeah, I really just, I thought it was a good template.
Anybody else? It did, when we developed this with Steve Kelly during like a board training, he did say that it should be updated every year or reaffirmed every year, so that's why
Reevaluated,
I
yeah.
put it on the agenda, or I asked for it to be put on the agenda. Okay.
So speaking of these, public comment, it sounds like we're gonna maybe come back with some ideas. Decorum and agenda template, is there an action that we need to take?
No,
Or are we just
I don't think so.
affirming verbally?
Is everybody okay if we just update it, put the date, today's date on it, and
That's fine with me if we're not going to vote on it.
Yeah.
I should have said this earlier, so cut me off if I'm too late. But I know we had an aversion to the word shall, and that decorum agreement uses the word shall quite a bit.
oh,
And I think there's really easy opportunity there to turn those into some wills,
okay.
and probably for the better. But I'd be fine, anybody that wants to do that.
All right. Well, we can bring those two back then. And then just the agenda template, we can just say we're good to go on. All right, everybody okay with all that?
I am.
Lori, you okay with that?
Yes, sounds good.
All right. You kind of sound like the Wizard of Oz behind the screen. You're so clear. Okay, so
Oh my good-
moving on to policy updates. There are several. And I think we'll just do what we have done, and just treat these all as a bunch, because for the most part, people haven't had a ton of questions. And so people can ask questions on any of the policies. We don't have to necessarily go in order, but once we kind of start on one, we'll probably want to finish on that one before moving on.
My question would be more broad than particular. Janet or Dan or anybody. This batch, I read all the cover statements. None of them, I shouldn't say none of them. As I read through them, they seemed like they were pretty straightforward. Is there anything more behind any of these that the board should be aware of? Any complex conversations you guys had to have in order to bring these forward, or are they, like I said, I sort of read them, I looked at the markup versions. I don't know, they seemed pretty straightforward, but that doesn't always tell the whole story. I guess I was just gonna ask broadly if there's anything noteworthy you wanted to share.
I mean, some of them had been, so for instance, the reimbursable meals and milk, that one had been kind of out there for quite a while. And so we finally just got around to being able to finalize. There was a lot of bracketed language in there to go through and trying to get with Marina, so that, veterans preference, AR was nothing relatively new, just finally got it up on the docket. a few of these Leslie went through and did, like the, I think all of the I ones that start with I were evaluated by Leslie and I think I's and J's. So she was just able to finally get in there and get some of those pushed through. So Janet, I don't know if,
Yeah, I did the Ks, which were about the commercial advertising, and there was no real change there. We allow that in certain, in facilities, we have signs up at baseball fields and so forth. We still prohibit the sale of items on school grounds, so that's consistent. So it was really updating language. There was no big change there. And then I also did tackle some on charter schools that are not quite ready yet, that aren't on this list. We had some good discussion around, obviously our student conduct work is ongoing, and so some of these policies are pretty just kind of bare bones. I mean, sort of like the bare minimum of what you would want, and I think I let Scott speak to this, but I think the code of conduct is going to be much more comprehensive and rich and robust and give a lot of context and nuance. There was one AR that wasn't required. We decided to leave it out with regard to tobacco and alcohol because it was the punitive nature of it, in the sense of having these sort of mandated consequences, ran counter to the spirit of what we're trying to develop in our code of conduct, which is to understand the student and the circumstances. And so we had some good, robust discussion around that. But yeah, nothing, I don't think there was anything in particular that would be contentious or,
No,
Yeah.
I appreciate the narrative. I mean, for me, that's helpful, I guess. So I appreciate it.
We did have a question on that one. I did appreciate Dawn's notes about, there was option 1 and option 2, and option 1
Right.
seemed to be a better fit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess it's not a question. My question again is general. Do we have to consider ARs at the board level? Because
Depends
I've
on the
noticed that for
AR.
some things, we just leave the ARs to
Mm-hmm.
admin, but then some of the ARs came up today, so does it just depend on the case?
it seems to me, isn't that right, Dan?
yeah, and I think, but it's been our practice to try to get them all in front of you and to have you aware, because that is where kind of the rubber meets the road and how things are going to be carried out. So I know that we had the one AR related to non-accredited private schools that we went ahead and told you about, but we just did it because we had people waiting. So I think it's going to be our practice to bring them forward to you.
But we don't have to necessarily approve them.
Correct.
Okay. I was just trying to figure things out. And then all of these are approvals, not strikes. Is that correct? Because I was reading, one of them was really complex, and I can't remember which one it was.
The advertising one where one could be
Yeah.
adopted and the other one,
Yes.
yeah.
Right.
So I just wanted to make sure that we are all sure about what we're talking about here. It seemed to me like they were all just replacements or additions, not strikes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, I want to thank everybody for all the work that goes on behind the scenes.
I was going to say, with the, I don't know if this is helpful or not, what I've noticed, and Dan and Scott can jump in, is when OSBA does like a delete replace, usually it's, a statutory change, so they've had to sort of do a complete overhaul, or they've taken policies that maybe were three separate policies and put them together in the same policy, or they've taken one policy and split it into three, so it tends to be kind of boring in the sense that nothing substantive changed other than they decided that it made a lot more sense for things to be organized differently. That's when we, I think, tend to see a lot of the delete replace.
Got it. Well, I'm assuming we don't have to be perfect on our understanding of that. If we approve the policy, and if we approve, I mean, it might be like, what's the word, automatic, that if you approve this policy, you're gonna, it replaces this other one, and we don't have to go back through and the board says, we're getting rid of this policy. It's just kind of like, this is the new policy, and then Debbie probably takes it out of our website, you know, okay. That's good. I just want to make sure that we don't have to be perfect in our application of the strikeouts and all of that. All right, any other thoughts on the policy first reads? All right, well, let's move to our action items. And I know that some people were listening to the conversation ahead of the meeting about what kind of motion to make regarding the Pratham grade change. So I'll be looking for a motion in a second about that.
I move to approve the Pratham Elementary School grade change.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that the board approve the Pratham Elementary School grade change. And just to clarify, that's to a K-8. And we don't discuss this now, right? Or yes, we can discuss this now. Do I
After a
have-
second, you can always discuss.
Okay. Any discussion? All right, let's vote.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Janet,
Yes.
Jonathan,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Lori,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
all in favor.
All right. Well, without objection, meeting adjourned.